Hello. Yeah. Hello everyone, thank you for coming to track 2 at our 2 o'clock talk here. Or 1 o'clock talk, sorry, time's variable. Thank you everyone for attending today. We really appreciate everyone coming in person. I hope you guys really enjoyed the con. Next up we have Kate Kuehn in our talk on visibility can't be zero when talking trust, and she works for VR. So if you can, give a nice big round of applause for Kate. Thank you.
I like to walk and talk, so we're gonna go this way. So first of all, I want to introduce you to somebody. This is Zero Trust Baby. As you can see, I'm his sidekick, I'm a hacker. He is 7 weeks old, and you can follow him on Twitter, @ZeroTrustBaby, and he tweets about all things Zero Trust. So I have been in security for 25 years. And I have done everything from engineering, sales, I've gone to the dark side and been a CISO, I've gone to the even darker side and been a CEO, and I love all aspects of security. And there's always a buzzword. So when John and I were talking about what I could give a talk on, I was like, how about I give a talk on probably the biggest buzzword of buzzwords out there right now, Zero Trust. Has anyone heard of Zero Trust? Has anyone not heard of Zero Trust? Does anyone really know what it is? So today we're going to cover a couple of things. We're going to cover, 1, what really is Zero Trust? 2, what should we think about and consider on the journey to Zero Trust? And why is Zero Trust so important today? What are the market conditions and the factors that are causing us to want to understand and have implementation of Zero Trust? And then last but not least, what are some of the pitfalls and things we should be thinking about if we're going to actually implement a Zero Trust strategy? So the reason I have exploited my poor 5th child into Zero Trust Baby is when you think about it, there's a lot of correlation between an organization's cyber maturity and our own maturity. So Kuehn here, Zero Trust Baby, is 7 weeks old. He trusts everything in his life at this point. Like if I picked him up and handed him to you, he would go, right? Yeah. As an infant, you trust everyone. Just like when you are starting out in a security model, you would like to be able to trust all of your employees. You would like to believe that everyone that has access for good reason. And it's as you start to mature, you know, those first things, all of a sudden your 2-year-old doesn't want to sit on Santa's lap because Santa's terrifying. Then you have, you know, you get a little older and don't talk to strangers. Never talk to a stranger. You start to push that trust out of them. Organizations are the same way. If you think about it, you have that first breach and you're like, oh my gosh, I gotta lock everything down. Okay, well I locked too much. Maybe I'll step back a little bit. You know, maybe we only trust these people or this group. And then as you get older and you become an adult, you need 3 forms of identification and 2-factor authentication before you're going to talk to anybody, right? You go totally the other way with it. And we're seeing organizations do that. So why? Well, a couple of things. Have there been any breaches this year? Made the news? A couple?
None at all.
None at all. I know, it's been a really slow year this year. I've been getting a lot of sleep. It's amazing. No, there have been a ton of mainstream breaches, and I'd love to say what's old is new and what's new is old in cybersecurity. I have seen more supply chain breaches, my favorite type of breach, where they get in and pass things and then install code and do all sorts of crazy stuff. We're seeing a lot of breaches that are causing us to look at 2 things. 1, who has access to what? And do we really know where things are? Hence, enter Zero Trust. And for the old people in the room, like myself, it kind of reminds me of something called least privilege access. Yeah, I'm seeing the nods. Like I had a long conversation for about 2 hours with my good friend Dave Fairman. We're like, this is just least privilege access on steroids that somebody's made a better term of. So here's the other market conditions that are going on right now. Anyone want to take a guess? A year ago, a breach would cost an enterprise organization $1 million. How much do you think it's costing today on average? $3.37 million. Cyber insurance premiums are going up because of it. Anyone want to know what is the percentage increase in the last 6 months? 35%. And here's the last one. There has been a huge rise of a very specific type of malware that you can now download onto your phone and have an SLA around. Did you know that? What type of malware am I talking about? Ransomware. There you go. That boat anchor that kills systems and costs millions and millions of dollars. What do you think the average cost of a ransomware attack is right now to pay, if you're going to pay it? Those that were in my high school thing this morning aren't allowed to answer. $220,000 per attack. Yeah. So, this is why we should trust no one. So, if we're going to trust no one, the interesting thing is it's the first time in response that we're seeing the government really start to take notice of cybersecurity matters. And it was interesting, because we're going to come back to this, that in May of this year, we saw the first executive orders not only really mandate and push zero trust and use a buzzword in the government, something we don't usually see, but also we see all of the Five Eyes following suit. And this became the kicking point of companies from an enterprise perspective starting to think about executing zero trust. So the interesting thing is, how many enterprise companies, if we polled 1,000, do you think right now would be executing a zero trust strategy?
Just one.
You're not all that far off. So right now, if we did on 451 research, out of 1,000 companies polled, only 13% say they have a fully executed zero trust strategy. Now here's the first thing. They call it a solution. Hold that point. But there's 50% plus of companies that say they're going to do it in the next, they're planning to deploy in the next 12 to 24 months, somewhere in there. So between now and the next 2 years, they're going to have a zero trust strategy. Hence, enter every single vendor out there right now trying to sell something. Yep. So let's kind of paint the picture of this talk then. We have massive rise in criminal activity and hacker activity going on right now. We have, and we're not quite sure yet why the rise is happening. We have the government stepping in and saying, you must think about zero trust, and you have a number of organizations trying to implement zero trust. So the question is, what are the current state issues? Well, if you're an organization and you're trying to put forth a zero trust strategy, you're running into some pretty big roadblocks if you're trying to also address the risk of the day. First thing, what are we seeing in these supply chain attacks? Lack of visibility is equaling risk. Exploitation in areas they didn't know they had. Second thing, agent-based products. Anyone know the average amount of solutions in an enterprise estate? 80. 80 security tools. A lot of them are agent-based. So slow deployment of patches, of new solutions, of new endpoint agents are causing major roadblocks, not only in integrations, but in the ability to migrate to new technologies that would help mitigate the risk. We're seeing unmitigated permission sprawl, and everything's siloed. It's complex. And if anyone's heard of this pandemic, what we've been dealing with, we're seeing a huge shift in how we architect our environments that are causing even more complexity. So this is what we're facing from a current state perspective when starting to think about zero trust. Now, if this is what a customer's facing, what do you think the market pressures are right now? Do you think the market's helping or hindering? hindering. So we're seeing right now probably two of my favorite and most difficult shifts in the security marketplace today. Because of the pandemic, we are seeing a major shift towards transformation. Companies are not going back to offices. They're continuing to work from home. We are seeing a major shift towards cloud adoption. But you don't just put everything, poof, into AWS. Trust me, that's my husband's job right now for a healthcare company. It just doesn't go overnight. It's been 2 years. So you're seeing hybrid, public-private mix. You're seeing also, which I think is most interesting, the necessity for dynamic security control. We can't have things be static anymore. So we have companies that are trying to deal with risk. Everything's too slow, it's not going fast enough, they can't see what they have, and you have two market trends. One, all these static tools we're used to feed them information and they'd spit out a report, they're all out the window. You gotta be able to see real time what's happening. Second thing, we're seeing a huge shift in how we look at security. It used to be event-based, right? A plus B equals C, you'd see how it get in through the firewall, you could see what happened and there'd be a nice correlation. It's now moved to relational-based security. I'm allowed to talk to Paul, but I'm not allowed to talk to Kate. Suddenly I'm talking to Kate. What's the ramification of that? Because Kate can talk to, you have to understand the relationships. So in the face of this market change, we're seeing this right here create a couple of things. Increased threat profile. Think about the attacks in the past year. Application resilience, keeping your applications up, has become a critical imperative. Multi-cloud adoption, it's a lot of fun, isn't it? And business requirements for increased velocity, because I'll give you an example. A customer, a financial services customer, they went from 98% in office to 98% work at home in less than 48 hours. Yeah. So how do you start to think about this? And this has set the scene for, what are we here to talk about today? Least privilege access on steroids. So before we begin, let's get a working definition of zero trust. Zero trust is not a solution. Zero trust is a set of guiding principles for workflow, system design, and operation. It is not a solution, a vendor, it is an architecture. Oh, this would be, it is an architecture, sorry. Didn't realize that my slide was wrong. The other thing is, it's not a box. It's not going to be one product. At its core, it separates the control plane, policy orchestration, from policy enforcement. And according to NIST, you should have two strategies: user access controls and application-to-application controls. Sounds pretty simple, right? Things we've been doing for years. So what is causing zero trust to be such a fixation? It sounds pretty simple. Never trust, always verify, default deny. The critical thing to remember is, if it's not a solution, what is it? Well, it's a journey. And the journey to get to zero trust has a couple critical things. And again, on the surface, they seem simple. One, discover. Have you discovered everything in your environment? When polled, 92% of CISOs and CIOs admitted that they did not have confidence that they knew where everything was in their environments. Key point. Healthcare company I was talking to a couple of months ago, they were in the middle of implementing a zero trust strategy, and they got a call. They were also moving a bunch of stuff to AWS, that they found a new environment. What do you mean you found a new environment? They had a test environment that nobody remembered to turn down in China. that nobody had looked at or patched in 3 years. Discover. Understanding everything in your environment. Next thing is visibility. This is my big passion, visibility, because it's not a question of not only understanding what you have, but do you know where it is and what it's actually doing and who has access to it? Large bank was working with on the East Coast. We started looking at their zero trust journey, and when we ran the first scans on visibility, it was almost eye-opening that they didn't realize. They actually were looking at the first scan of what was going on in the network, and the CIO said, there's a bug. What do you mean there's a bug? There's no way that data is leaving. That wouldn't happen. And we were physically watching, literally, data being moved off the environment. There must be something going on here. Like, there's a bug in your system. Picks up the phone, makes 3 calls. We were watching an in-progress data theft. Yeah. He literally stopped the meeting and was like, I'll call you back. We heard from him a month later after they'd finished the forensics reports. Do you understand what you have? Can you see it? And do you understand what it's doing and if it's doing things it should be doing? Next step, dependency mapping. Again, do you know what you have? Can you see it? Do you know what you should be doing? What else is it dependent on? I love telling stories if you can't figure this one out. And I'm really into financial services. So, bank, not going to tell where, but somewhere in the world, had a program called Never Down, where in the pandemic they decided that you had to, and the regulators were pushing this, you could not have your mobile banking app, because I get really grumpy if I can't have access to my money. I don't know about you. Mobile app could not be down more than 30 minutes. 30-minute SLA or you're going to get fined. That sounds reasonable, right? So when they looked at the application, they realized that they would never be able to execute that SLA. Not because they didn't want to, or it was a critical system, but that critical application had dependencies on multiple applications that had no SLA. So how can you have a 30-minute SLA over here if it's dependent on things that don't have the same like SLAs? Do you understand your dependencies? Now here's the one that gets most people, continuous assurance. Doesn't seem like it'd be the worst one. But if you have a clean inventory and you do all this stuff, is it one moment in time? Or is it dynamically changing with your environment? I can't tell you, having been a CISO myself, how many times my peers go, oh, well, I have a clean inventory. Great, is it current? Well, we did it 3 weeks ago. Great, it's not current. Because there's this thing called change control. We're not static, we're dynamic. So until we start understanding that assurance equals dynamicism, you're never going to be able to execute a zero trust journey. And last but not least, policy enforcement. Do you have the buy-in to actually walk the walk and the right policies? And what I mean by that is no caveats, no exceptions, zero trust. And I'll tell you, that's sometimes the hardest one to overcome, is you have literally somebody in the organization, again, company I'm very close to, healthcare company, might have somebody who works there in my family, literally was like, hey, I'm implementing zero trust, but you know what? We did one thing differently. We have a special group of users that have access to everything. That's not zero trust. It's not zero trust. So again, not just the policy enforcement from an automation standpoint, but do you have the right enforcement from a human capital standpoint? So once you actually realize what the journey is, how do you get started? And what are some of the things to remember? We've talked about some of them, but one, zero trust is an architecture, not a single product. I can't say that enough. Because every single one of my counterparts is saying, hey, we're a zero trust solution. Do you know that I can help you implement zero trust? I am so tired of that, can I tell you? You know what my company does, vArmour? We do 2 things. We help prepare you, because we can help you with visibility, and we can help make sure that once you've completed the journey, that you stay current. That's what we do. So if you ever hear me say that I can help you on your zero trust solution, please shoot me, because it's not true. I can do the front and I can do the back. I'm not gonna help you in the middle. That's not my job. Second, we talked about this, lack of support. You know that journey you just saw? That's something you can explain to a board or a layman. We can't take this from a very techie perspective, but everyone in the organization needs to understand the sincerity around that concept of trust no one, or you're gonna end up trusting everybody. Remember, zero trust baby who just disappeared. Third, poor information equals poor outcome. Not having accurate and current information will do more harm than good. Working with a company in Canada, it took them 6 months to get an inventory. 6 months. Guess how they got their inventory? CMBD rationalization, spreadsheets, and interviews. One of the largest companies in the world. And honestly, that's more times than not what we see. And the sad part is when they brought us all the information, I had to look a counterpart of mine in the eyes and go, it's not current. Poor information equals poor outcome. Do you have dynamic control? Again, goes into it. Dynamic inventory will counterbalance the complexity. And then the one that's my favorite, zero trust is a journey, not a project. It has no end. It is the never-ending story. And the one thing that's sometimes I think hard for non-security professionals is you have to educate that you assume the attackers are already in. That's hard. That there is no world that they're not already in. What do you guys think so far? I'm gloom and doom and we're never all going to get zero trust, right? But here's the number one challenge we see. It's this lack of visibility. And the reason I like to highlight this is because poor visibility inside the enterprise perimeter makes zero trust treacherous. Here's why. If you look at the user in the rogue machine, in this hybrid world, you can assume that if there's rogue machines, if you don't have visibility in what you're supposed to be doing, you are going to continue to fail at zero trust. Visibility is by far the number one thing you need when you're looking at zero trust. Do you understand what is talking to what, who is talking to who, what is talking to who is talking to what? Kind of complex, right? And really what the applications and workloads are doing. So if I have 20 applications, how many workloads do you think I have? Any ideas? Paul, you're not allowed to say. On average, 2,000. Any idea how many relationships between them, interdependencies? Not that high, about 5,000. So think about that. Most organizations have no clue how intertwined from a visibility perspective they're facing when dealing with zero trust. And without this visibility, it's almost impossible to keep a good zero trust architecture going. So let's go and flip the other side. How do we create success? Well, visibility, I can't say enough visibility, but there's a couple other things. One, you need to have a management system. You need to be able to have multiple enforcement functions with the ability to provide orchestration when it becomes critical. Good management on solid visibility is a critical key. The second, we talked about it till we're almost blue in the face, is that accurate inventory. Do you have the ability and the understanding of the entities within the environment and their interdependencies? And are you able to really have a source of truth for their relationships real-time in a dynamic fashion? And the third thing is an enforcement function. Again, Are you able to carry out the policies without exception necessary for ZTA? Again, why I break this down this way is this is easy for the non-security layman. Okay, here's my journey, and here's the 3 things I need to implement. It's a lot easier to get buy-in on something like this than showing a huge diagram and trying to explain, what you're going to do on an orchestrated segmentation program, right? Okay. These 3 things. Once you have these 3 requirements, the next question, it was interesting because I'm actually doing another panel about zero trust in a couple weeks for a government conference, is how do you start? So we have a journey, we have the critical success factors, where do you start? Anyone have an idea of what kind of project you should start with? Other than visibility and inventory, once you're through those? Segmentation. Gartner is my favorite. Gartner recommends enterprises start with a segmentation project. Organizations looking to move to practical implementation should focus on 2 primary projects: user to application segmentation and workload to workload segmentation. Why would we do that? Any ideas? Because orchestrated segmentation allows us to create that visibility that we were talking about and that enforcement plane we were talking about. I like the concept of orchestrated segmentation. Has anyone heard of orchestrated segmentation? Yeah, a couple people. It's really simple. Orchestrated segmentation is nothing but compute intent-based policies across existing enforcement platforms. So creating the same policies, the same visibility across everything, so that you can orchestrate the same experience irregardless of your environment. Make sense? I love everyone's like this, I agree with that, I don't agree with that. Yeah.
Based on the previous time we talked about segmentation, right? Traditionally, it would be very hard to think about firewall, about networking. Really, how do you do identity?
So from identity segmentation, what we're looking at here is how the user is accessing multiple clouds. So it's a question of the visibility play and whether or not, and this again is more of a vArmour solution, but are you able to leverage full visibility of what the user is doing across all different of the architectures, and then enforce one single policy across multiple architectures, irregardless if it's public or private. So that's how you look from an identity perspective. One policy across multiple architectures. You guys agree with this? Everyone is like, no, yes, okay. So once you do your segmentation project, then it's a question of where do you go from there. What I like to look at is what are some of the takeaways then? If you don't have to go through and once you have segmentation in place, what are the key takeaways to continue forward with a zero trust program? And this is where it's really tailored, dependent on your organization and your needs. 1, can you maintain consistent visibility? 2, where do you need to go to create and ensure distributed scaling architecture? 3, this is a key one, avoiding policy duality. And then once that's achieved, continuous policy assurance. This is one that we see a lot of companies struggle with, leveraging existing technology. How do you sweat the assets you already have instead of having to deploy new? And then also consistent taxonomy. Do you understand what the relationships are and the assets in a common language? If you can then create, after the orchestrated segmentation or the segmentation project, a plan around these key takeaways, then you can actually push that journey into the next level as far as a life cycle management versus a continually forward journey. And that's the key, is how do you take it and go from a straight line into something that you can manage. Yeah. Yeah, yeah. You've got to start two things. One, it's the asset discovery and understanding everything you have, and then defining what you want from a policy perspective. What do you have already deployed? And then how do you continue to ensure that you have real-time control? Exactly. And the hard part is so he was asking, like, how do you put the guardrails in place? And the critical thing is the guardrails are easy. Understanding what your policies are, what you want to accomplish is the easy part. It's the question of how do you continually enforce to make sure that that's the outcome. And the other key thing when you're looking from a policy perspective is the enforcement's not all that hard either. It's making sure that you continue to enforce the right things. Exactly, it's the exception avoidance. It's the classic issue I saw maybe 5-6 years ago with SIEMs. You would have a SIM and you would have everything under the sun fed into it. And then you'd make an exception, and then you'd make an exception, and then you'd make an exception, and then you would fail an audit because you had too many exceptions. Yeah, so how do you maintain to not make exceptions? So you have this pyramid, you have this concept of zero trust. The interesting thing is it's really hard. So talked with a CISO from the government this morning as we were prepping for a panel, and he was saying, we've started the journey and I don't know what to do next. We do all of those things, those 5 things we were showing, and I can't sort out what I should be doing next first. Because I feel like we do it all, we just haven't put it all together. And we're seeing that across every enterprise, that everyone's kind of raising their hand and going, we get the triangle, we get the journey, but we don't understand how we put a reference architecture, a policy control framework, and everything else we showed in one box. And I think that's why you're seeing such a huge rise in the industry of so many companies going, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. What do you think the government's done in response?
Platform 1, zero trust implementation, zero trust implementation, guidance from this. Already SP800 series, and a special document on top of that, covering zero trust implementation architectures and how to execute. CISO's even working on a special document now.
So you are exactly right. I was joking this morning that I have 127 pages of reading from my friends at the White House this week on zero trust, but it's the first time I've seen the government actually, this week, welcoming public feedback. The White House and CISA, and actually will be released this week, 3 different documents. So the Federal Zero Trust Strategy Doc, the CISA Maturity Model, and the Cloud Security Technical Reference Architecture. And they've openly called for the public to respond with comments and questions. For the last 2, the CISA Zero Trust and the Cloud Security Technical Reference Architecture, they're taking comments and questions on it till October 1st. On the federal strategy, September 21st. If the government is asking for feedback on how to make this better, this is tough. But I thought this was really interesting that, and literally, the 3 documents together are 127 pages. But I think it's a great step forward in public and private collaboration as we look to really approach this not as a solution, not as a product, but as a journey and something that we all have to contribute to if we're going to continue to mitigate the new types of attacks that we're facing. And if we do all of that, maybe we'll sleep like a baby. Maybe zero trust baby again. Any questions? Saw a lot of people taking pictures, so I guess my slides were okay. Any questions about Zero Trust? Any questions about Zero Trust Baby? Was this helpful, guys? Good, 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 good. Yeah.
In particular, how do you recommend protection CAs and identity CAs in deployment?
Why don't we take that offline, because that's a longer conversation than 2 minutes. We'll take that offline. Any other questions? So the question is, what do you do when you have an organization that wants exceptions? And they just don't understand that that's not Zero Trust. So a couple of things. We run into that more often than not. Working right now with one of the largest telcos in the world, and this has been an ongoing battle because you have silotized groups. And so, you know, this group wants Zero Trust, this group doesn't. This group wants this group wants that, this group wants the other thing. This is how we handle that. Zero Trust is not an all or nothing thing, okay? You can execute Zero Trust if you have a large organization on a specific area of your environment, right? Maybe it's your crown jewels, maybe it's the critical apps, but you don't have to have it be everywhere. You just have to have unequivocal buy-in to the area you're going to implement it. So a lot of times, part of that dependency mapping you saw in that visibility discovery area, part of the discovery phase is working with an organization to say, where is it critical that you implement Zero Trust right now? What does that look like? And then, as adoption and culture changes, that it's not this visceral reaction of trust no one, you know, and that's okay. It's okay to trust no one from an environmental standpoint. Then you'll see, in essence, scope creep happen the other direction, where it becomes easier to adopt Zero Trust in other areas of the organization. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. There's just a visceral reaction for some, and a lot of times, and I'm one of them, so I can say it, old network dogs. The idea that you're going to take away my controls on everything, it's a hard battle. So fight the battle where you need it, where it's really important, and get the cultural buy-in, and then you can kind of laterally move through an organization to get a larger footprint from a Zero Trust perspective. The one thing to remember though, and this was something I learned, and it was a hard lesson to learn, is when you're talking about critical assets, 80% of companies have misidentified what they consider their crown jewels. So really work with your, perfect example, worked with a large manufacturing company in the Midwest, and they came to me and they said, Kate, when we implement this strategy, you need to remember that our recipes are our crown jewels. Whatever you do, protect our recipes. Oh, they're a consumer packaging good manufacturing company. That makes sense, right? It's recipes. When we did the analysis, 2,000 employees a day had access to those recipes. They were unprotectable. They were spending $10 million a year protecting something that was not able to be protected. What were their crown jewels? Their M&A activity and their future marketing stuff of where they were headed next in the market. Guess how much they were spending on protecting that stuff? Zero. So when you start the Zero Trust journey and you think about your critical assets, as security professionals, that's one of the best things we can do is go to the board, go to your leadership and say, we really should analyze what is the critical data of the company. Do we really understand what our crown jewels are? And run that tabletop before you invest $1 in how you're going to execute the security piece of it. Again, it's that cultural piece that we kind of forget about sometimes as security professionals. Everyone's like food coma. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much for your time.